Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Interweaving Vertical and Horizontal Development, a whole person approach to scale leadership. I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Sounding Board. Sounding Board is an industry leader in scalable leadership coaching and offers a global network of professional coaches dedicating to addressing leadership skill gaps and driving immediate business impact. I'm Jess Thompson, the Content Manager for Learning and Development at ATD, and I will be your moderator today. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers. Carlo Bos, co-CEO for Coactive Training Institute, has more than 2 decades of experience in leadership development. He is passionate about developing courageous and conscious leaders and committed to ensuring that equity, inclusion, diversity, and accessibility are at the heart of CTI's products, operation, and people experience. Lori Mazan, co-founder, president, and chief coaching officer at Sounding Board, has spent 25 years coaching C-suite executives to develop critical leadership capabilities that have immediate positive business outcomes. Lori is passionate about her desire to expand access to high-quality leadership coaching. And now, without further ado, Carlo and Lori.
All right.
Hi, Carlo.
Hi, Lori, and hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
I'm so excited to be here with Carlo from the Coaches Training Institute. I actually was trained as coach there way back in the early 90s. So I guess we do have decades of things that we can talk about today.
We've all come a long way since then, Lori, as the field of leadership development and coaching, certainly, which we're really excited to, share some like emerging learning that Lori and I have been in discussion about for the past couple of months, I think, Lori.
A couple months, and I feel like this vertical and horizontal developmental approaches is very current and cutting edge. And Carlo and I don't really have all the answers around this. We're just wanting to start the discussion around this topic and share what we're thinking about and also hear what you're thinking about as well.
Yeah. I think, as Lori's saying, we're feeling like some of these ideas are new and emergent, and they're also probably familiar in some ways. What we notice is happening is the opportunity to start to frame some of these concepts, particularly around vertical development and how you actualize, how you make those real in leadership development programs for leaders leading in these times.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I'm going to start just by showing the agenda here for those of you that want to see the pathway that we're going to take. And we're actually just going to start at the very beginning with the idea that around increasing complexity in the work environment. I'm sure you all have noticed that over the last couple of years, and we have as well. So, Carlo, what have you been seeing?
What have I been seeing, or what have I been experiencing? I think it's worth noting, Lori, that we both work with leaders on leadership development and lead our companies, our businesses.
Yes.
I think one of the things that most people, if not everyone on this call, could identify with is the rate and change and scale of complexity businesses are facing is increasing and are unique based on people's industry, based on where you're located in the world, based on the sector or your employee base. So scale and pace and uniqueness of the complexity is one of the things that I'm aware of. How about you?
Yeah, I think two points for me. One is just how unpredictable the environment has become. I mean, when we think back to those early days in the 90s, things seemed relatively tame back then. I feel like now every day there's something new, the macro environment, the micro environment, the work at home, don't work at home, work in the office, like every day something new. And we're having to find ways to help leaders adapt to an environment where they can't predict the future.
Yeah.
And I think what I've seen is leaders are scared. Like they're not sure what to do. They're not sure how to respond. it creates a lot of stress for them in this kind of unpredictable environment. And I think like human nature is when you're not sure, you revert back to your old habits or maybe even just under stress. So I've seen even publicly leaders showing up with a more authoritarian point of view, kind of back to the old days of command and control, like forcing people in the office or forcing people out of the office or whatever it is. I think there's an opportunity for a new way to think about leadership that doesn't just revert the old ways that we know are not that successful anymore in this environment.
Yeah, I can appreciate what you're saying about just our desire to try to control the change or the degree of change or the amount of change, and the distinction of control versus what we're going to talk about, which is really capacity. How do I increase my capacity to be very present to the changing circumstance and lead and create and prioritize in it, as opposed to try to use what's worked for me in the past to navigate this current context?
Yeah. I mean, actually, underneath all of that is just that like need to be fully present, because if you operate out of the past, it's really not going to work in this environment. I also think like that change, and this is really what we're going to be talking about here, sort of a new way to focus that skills are great. We all need skills. We got to have them, but they're just not enough for dealing with the complexity in the environment. And it seemed like maybe the last 5 years, there's been a really big focus on skills. We coined, somebody, I don't know who coined the phrase upskilling. We have learning experience platforms now that are supposed to be teaching us skills. And there's been a lot of talk about skills. But there isn't very much talk about the application of those skills and how you utilize those skills in different ways in different environments, whether that environment is internal, external, or that environment is different levels in an organization. So it kind of seems like with the conversation only about skills, something is really missing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Lori. I make light because, as you're saying, skills development is still very important. It helps me with what I can do as a leader.
Yeah.
And skills are something I can acquire. A skill could be a process, a competency, a tool. And the acquisition of skills and knowledge we're still suggesting are very important. But as you're noting, Lori, not sufficient when the circumstances in which we're trying to apply those skills keep changing. So that's where we talk about this idea of capacity, which is really like, that gets me towards how, who, and what I can lead over a wider range of, again, changing circumstances. So skills are something I acquire. Capacity is something I develop and nurture in myself so that I can use those skills more effectively across a broader range of needs that I'm going to be encountering as a leader, whether I want to or not. So skills and capacity is what we're pointing to. That's the new imperative. How do we develop both in leaders?
Yeah, and that both of those are necessary. Way back in the day, I used to actually be in training, and I was a trainer for soft skills, communication skills, and leadership skills, and that kind of thing. And we did train skills with the role playing and that kind of thing. But I found that the participants in those events always wanted to know, but yeah, this is really good, but how do I actually use this when I go back to the office? Like, what does this look like when I'm actually in a conversation with my manager or my disgruntled employee or, somebody else? And in that setting, it was hard to talk about those kinds of application. And yet now it's become a necessary fact, really. We have to.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, the idea that the context that leaders are having to apply those skills to are becoming, even over the last 2 years, more divergent as the pandemic hit and the outcome, and as remote work took off, and as more cross-cultural integrated conversations began with people working from home. So as you put up, how do we develop skills and capacity? What's the orientation? As per the title of the webinar, we're holding it as horizontal and vertical development, two axes of development that we would point leaders towards engaging in.
Mhm. Exactly. So we want to take a little time to just discuss really what does that actually mean? It might be some new language for some old things that have been happening. And I think it always helps when you're starting a new, thinking pattern that you have some good language to try to talk about that way of thinking.
Well, I think what we're I know what we're inviting too is Lori and I are sharing with all of you some of the language that is coming up in our conversation, and for the Q&A, really want to hear from you. What's some of the language in this conversation today or language you're using that could be in support of these concepts? So we'll look forward to hearing a little bit more about your language. Here's some of ours. We talked about horizontal development. It's the acquisition of skills, knowledge, information. Great. It's almost an outside in move, how I get things done in my job. Vertical development is really about the leader developing, as it says here, more expanded ways for them to gain insight, for them to expand their thinking, for them to engage and respond to diverse business conditions. And so we've used the term situationally effective. Situational leadership's been around a long time. What we're pointing to is vertical development as we get into it is really about the leader's internal capacity to develop, take on, incorporate new points of view and perspectives, and the capacity to observe, to engage in those situations uniquely.
I really love that concept of outside in versus inside out. The outside in, the gaining of those skills, but that inside out, same thing. How do you, apply those skills? And one of the things I think it leads to is just a more authentic leadership style and leadership approach, because there isn't just one way to apply skills. That if it's inside out, then it's going to be that particular leader's approach to applying that. And these days there's not really one size fits all. What seems to be working a lot better is this more authentic, personalized approach to the issue.
What you're pointing to, which is great, is there's a relationship that's ongoing between the outside in learning and the inside out learning. As I take on new skills, it informs, or the opportunity to inform, who I am and how I respond as a leader. That learning can change me, which changes then how I use the skill, because that's the unique, authentic expression. So I think as we have this conversation today, it's like, how are those things always in relationship? And how are we as leaders and leadership development professionals taking responsibility and ensuring our leaders are doing both bodies of work? I realize I'm holding them like they're horizontal. It's sort of this together. It's this kind of model. But they're informing each other.
Yeah, I actually love your languaging on that. I almost want you to say it again, because it's like sort of the definition of interweaving. We're actually not talking about having them stand side by side. We're actually talking about one informing the other, or both informing each other as the development occurs. Like, can you actually try to say that again? I know, like, hard to repeat what you actually said.
Well, here's what I know is at the center of it is that it's the relationship between the outside in learning to inform the inside out learning. As I learned, so for instance, when I was learning coaching skills, and I learned the skills, and inherently learning those skills had me begin to explore and investigate my own leadership. Had me question a bunch of assumptions or beliefs that I had, or ways in which I was leading my teams. And it gave me the choice to then lead the same or lead different based on the skills. So it changed how I led a little bit. And that meant that then I began to express the skills, not how I was trained in them exactly. but expressed the skills in my own leadership way, which
Yeah.
created an impact with my team, which then I had to look at my own learning. So
Yeah.
the
So
relationship
that actually created something unique, right?
well, as you're saying, my expression of it, just like,
Yeah.
you have your expression of
Yeah.
coaching.
Yeah.
But we're getting into a little bit more of like how these things work together, which is exciting. But this idea of how particularly vertical development insists, I would say, growth in the leader. And as they grow, so does their capacity to lead in more complexity.
Yes,
As they
absolutely.
grow, so does their capacity and effectiveness in leading in more complexity.
Yeah.
But you've got to be willing to grow yourself.
Right. Well, I actually think that's like a little value add or a bonus for everyone that's in the leader development world, because to actually apply these things for people who are looking for development, we have to do the work ourselves as well. So we get a little bonus there for our own learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's maybe delve a little bit more into each of these two arenas, and then we can talk more about how they work together.
Yeah. Well, I think, we've talked a little bit about the definitions. There's a few more words here. On the blue aspects of these slides, we've taken a fairly simple approach, but we've tried to make a clear distinction between when is horizontal development on its own most useful, and then what does vertical development add, which we'll show in just a moment. So horizontal development, if we're just doing skills development and wanting to apply those skills consistently over time, they tend to be most effective when leaders are facing challenges where the approaches and resolution are pretty clearly defined. I'm applying a specific project management framework or a particular coaching discipline, and the problems are fairly well defined, or the situations are well defined. Another situation or another place in which these skills development on their own are useful is when these challenges are in predictable, similar, or familiar environments. Mm-hmm. Meaning the people I encounter have like or shared experiences. The cultural context is familiar to specifically what I'm used to versus what the project team or the customers might be used to. So I've learned the skills in a particular way. I can apply them in the same way. Changing context isn't a consideration. So that's when horizontal development, at least at this stage of our thinking, is most effective.
Yeah, I think of this as really the more tangible parts of the leadership work. And it is kind of a sort of egocentric human nature thing that we tend to think what works for me would work for everybody. That's actually like the old golden rule, do unto others how they would do unto us. Right. But that's actually doesn't work anymore. We have to actually do unto others how they want to be done unto, which is a very different perspective than, what's happened maybe over the last 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah, as you're saying that, the one other thing that I would add is just with skills development or competencies or knowledge, we tend to focus on the application of the process or knowledge as being the dominant orientation to taking on the task, as opposed to what you're saying, which is really pay attention to how the process is impacting, the people or the situation, right. And then wondering if I actually need to adjust the process or the way in which I'm leading it. So horizontal development sort of has that more quantitative or defined focus, as you were saying.
Yes, exactly. So that actually just leads us right into the idea of vertical development, because we might be just looking at or noticing some very different things.
Yeah. I love, you presented this definition first to me, and I loved some of the words, some of the big words that are used in here. This idea of an individual as a leader's progressive growth, of increasing socio-emotional, sensory, and cognitive sophistication. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that my awareness and ability to comprehend in my thinking, my sensing, and my emotional effectiveness, my ability to comprehend and engage with different types of circumstance or variables. So I have more capacity to deal with more of that complexity. That's what vertical development is. I'm getting more effective. And in that, I start to become better able to respond to more complexity in my environment, to start to appreciate and create from, account for divergent perspectives, whether coming out of culture or coming out of different identities or coming out of different industry. And more, this last bullet is really standing out actually in my own work as a leader right now, to be present, agile, and resilient. Because so much of vertical development, ironically, it feels like it's like this upward move. It is a very present moment, create from the immediate circumstance response as a leader, holding some of the complexity that's there. So I'll start there. What would you add?
Well, and because you're doing that, you're not going to get it right every time. Right. And with the constantly changing environment as well, the resiliency, I think, is a critical factor. Yeah. I kind of think of this as the more intangible parts of leadership. They're a little hard to describe in a way. It's almost like in the past, it's been a bit of an it factor, like, know, when someone has it. And then, employees who are wanting to advance in the leadership ranks are confused about, wait, why am I not getting promoted? And maybe they don't have this, but how do you talk about this? How do you help them develop in this way so they can progress in the leadership ranks versus just kind of not mentioning it and letting other people move up that do have some of these capacities in play?
Yeah, to your point, I think we used the word relationship earlier. Vertical development can transform the way people relate to different audiences or constituencies and different kinds of problems, and frankly, to themselves. It's not just a single dimension of, I relate to salespeople this way. I relate to a customer challenge this way. So the
direct reports.
Direct reports, like the idea, of this, well, if there's a problem, I will solve it for my direct reports versus a myriad of other approaches. But that notion of the it factor you were mentioning, often what at least I've seen in other engagements with customers or even in our own organization, the folks with the it factor have been able to relate more effectively to more constituencies more often. And that's what has them rise in their organization. Now we have to look first at what are the circumstances and how well is that leader able to relate to themselves first.
Yeah, I love the concept of relating to yourself, or leaders relating to themselves. Like we used to call that self-awareness. Right. And we'd be like, oh, this leader isn't very self-aware. But what did that actually mean? We didn't really have a lot of language for what that meant. So I like that concept of a leader being in relationship with themselves. I haven't heard that very much, and I think it's pretty profound.
Yeah, well, certainly in the coach training we do, but coach training in general, and not the only forum, invites and invokes that kind of reflection, because the quality of your relationship with yourself, we would say, will be reflected in the quality of your relationship with colleagues.
Yeah,
it is inevitable, but maybe for another day.
Well, it's funny because I think that used to be considered some new agey woo-woo sort of thing, when the reality is we can see that in operation in our own businesses and the businesses we serve every single day.
Yeah. Well, even, and it applied to this slide, I'm going to actually start with the vertical development in relationship to what you just said. One of the things the global pandemic revealed was, for millions of employees, I read recently that upwards of 87 million American employees transitioned their work in some way in 2021. Well, I would assert that part of what happened is they took a look at their life, their work, and the quality of satisfaction. The framing is they got in relationship with themselves to sort of say, what is working for me and what is not working for me in my deal with my organization? And they said, that's not working for me, so I'm going to change.
Yeah.
And we've seen the very material impact of getting into a more conscious relationship with yourself, and then the impact on, hey, company X, I'm no longer going to work in this dynamic. I'm going to go somewhere else. So
Yes.
that's one of the things I think the past couple of years has revealed for us. And companies have had to respond in different ways to support then the relationship or the contract they have with their employees. So
Yes, yes. I mean, there's a lot of really awful things about the pandemic, but this one I think was one of the silver linings, that something about the being at home and having a less frantic or frenetic schedule allowed people to start to revive their relationship with themselves. And yes, in the transition, it's, I think, been kind of disconcerting and a little chaotic for businesses and companies. But I think down the road, like as a business owner and leader, I would want to have employees that are in relationship with themselves and want to be working in my business than people that don't. I just imagine the culture, the productivity, the innovation, creativity, collaboration would all be significantly improved as a result of that, once it starts to settle a bit.
yeah. Well, imagine if organizations held that as part of their responsibility to employees, to help
Yes.
them develop that, so that the quality of relationship back to the organization was what you just described.
Yes.
So
Well, one of the lucky things about owning and running a business is I can create that at Sounding Board, and we're really trying hard to create that at Sounding Board. So it really is about applying some of these ideas. And you mentioned, training coaches. I think that's obviously a great application. And we actually think coaching itself is also a good way to start to apply some of these ideas.
absolutely. Well, let's get there in just a sec. So I think part of what we're pointing to, we're now sort of saying on this slide, how do you put horizontal and vertical leadership development together? Because again, both are really important.
Yeah.
Here are some kinds of roles that organizations would invest in to develop skills and competencies. And again, every kind of training has the opportunity to do some, in the skills training, vertical development to get curious about it, but predominantly horizontal development can develop people in their competency. The vertical development, as we've said, then helps people take those skills and apply them into changing contexts. And we've got some macro contexts, which you'll all be familiar with, that are shaping business and people's lives these days. That if you weren't actually leading from context, the application of your skill set, even across these four different macro events, those skill sets would have very different impacts. Given the nature of those major events, given the identities of the people you'd be working with and how those differ, given your own resilience and restedness as a leader. Lori, you were saying at the beginning, leaders are scared, leaders are tired.
Yeah, they're exhausted.
It has just been one after another. And so this idea of actually acknowledging a context exists, acknowledging it is materially impacting people's lives, their ability to perform, and that it's not all equal based on the circumstances of lives. If leaders are developing vertically and able to account for more of the context and be curious about the impact, it makes the application of skills much more impactful, frankly. So that's
and I think much more effective, because having taught leadership skills in the past, and hopefully having been trained myself fairly extensively, I just found, even for myself, like, okay, I have a lot of skill sets there, but how am I going to use them in this environment? It's the environment I haven't been in before, so I really don't know. So I need help to think about that, to consider how my skills can be impactful or supportive or productive in these environments.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to your point about leaders and the impact of their application of skills in context, read that the cost of employee movement last year was in the trillions of dollars. One
Yeah.
study showed 2.4 trillion, cost companies $2.4 trillion.
Wow.
All of the transition that happened when you think about the cost of transition. And related, McKinsey did a survey, and what they found was, here's the difference between sort of trying to solve a vertical problem with a horizontal solution. What they found was, and I'm just going to read this segment here, employees were far more likely to prioritize relational factors, including feeling valued by their manager and organization and having a sense of belonging. Those are vertical needs. How do I fit in to this changing context? In contrast, employers were more likely to focus on transactional factors, such as inadequate compensation and programs to try to support work-life balance. So it's like a programmatic quantitative response, to your point earlier, to a vertical qualitative problem, creating context. So I found that interesting.
I like the concept of defining a problem as horizontal or vertical, because I think there are horizontal problems as well.
100%.
But I think with generational changes too, it's starting to trend towards vertical problems, just the sense of purpose, the wanting to be doing something that feels personally impactful, the wanting to maintain my personal uniqueness, even in a business setting that could kind of try to fit me in a box. Those are actually all vertical problems that companies are facing right now.
Yeah, as our cultural ones. How do I lead people in different cultures?
Yes.
And this, what we're talking about now, would be a vertical development opportunity and challenge.
Yes, yes. Well, hey, that was like a new concept, like defining a problem from that perspective. I actually like it because then you could identify what solution, what training or developmental solution could be put in place to support that. Yeah. So this is kind of just a diagram to help you visualize the horizontal versus vertical development. We're saying horizontal is transactional, not in a bad way. Like you have to have those transactions or you're not going to be able to operate a business. Yep. But they are a little more binary. You kind of know if they did it or they didn't. They came to work on time, they didn't come to work on time. That you know if it's completed or not completed. There's a way to judge that. Shifting an organizational view on diversity, I'm not sure how you're going to know if that's completed or not. It's like an ongoing process over time. I want to say something somewhat controversial, which I actually think most of our 360 assessment tools are really on the horizontal scale, because do you have a skill or not? You have it or not how are you applying it, but do you have it? Yes, no. And this is more outcome focused, as kind of the traditional business perspective has been. But when you look at the vertical, now we're talking a transformational change, and just a lot of what Carlo's been saying about ability to adapt, a level of sophistication and maturity, the sense of self. And the idea is you can have an outcome, but you can also have sustainable impact over time. It's not a point in time, it's a process that's developed.
Yeah, and that some of the comments are pointing to that in the chat. There are some things that are inherently evolutionary. It's developed over a point of time, and it's created from learning. It's actually created from a learning. You can apply really helpful horizontal processes, like agile processes, to frame vertical development challenges. So that's how they work together, but they're transformational events that happen in a system's maturity and a leader's maturity over time. Some folks in the chat were pointing to DEI is a great example, which you raised. It's not a done or not done.
Right. Right, exactly. And the thing I like about the interweaving of these two models is it creates this kind of continuous development. So I use this like triangle approach, which is if you increase the base of the triangle, that creates more space at the top of the triangle. So now you add the increasing of the vertical development as you go up the sides, and you don't ever hit the peak then. So if you just have vertical development without horizontal development, it's a closed system as well. You actually need both to create that ever expanding growth and development, both for the individual leader as well as the organization itself.
As I was thinking about this, I ended up back in like high school math class, and I started to think about surface area. So if you're just doing horizontal development, you're creating a wider foundation, but with a very narrow height band. So your surface area is width times low length. But if you're doing both, you're actually creating the surface area that you can cover as a leader. So this model had me think about
expanding surface layer,
right, exactly. So vertical and horizontal development allows you to cover more surface area or more circumstance as a leader, but you've got to be doing both. Just like you can't just have vertical development but no skill set. So that's why we're advocating for both. So anyway, if there are any other math, I'm not a math.
That was a good example. I don't think I actually passed high school geometry the first time around. I think I was having a whole lot of fun in like 8th, 9th, 10th grade and not paying too much attention to that.
Yeah. So yeah, this is just another, we're giving you a couple of graphics to play with here, just around how to think about this within your organization. This is a framing of capacity. And again, paying attention back to where Lori started, which was in the VUCA analogy, increasing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity in the world. You can even see it in the body language of the characters themselves, but capacity 1 tends to have a fairly static orientation, applying skills in the same way, not able to navigate much complexity. So predictable, stable environments.
I think that was considered like the key in a more industrial environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, out of which a lot of education and business training emerged and in some cases still operates.
Yeah.
Through to capacity 4, you can really see again in the body language of the leader demonstrated this idea of being actually more agile, able to account for and create from more of the complexity and set strategies and priority and direction and followership culture in a way that has people feel more included and therefore more able and willing to respond to business needs amidst changing complexity. So, and that is directly, we would say, proportional to the vertical development a leader does.
Yeah, I like how you made the models there be more expansive even with their bodies.
Yeah. Well, it's an important part. We talked earlier about developing sensory capacity. Lots of neuroscience to illustrate this, but this idea of actually developing sensory awareness as a leader and movement is really central to gaining some of the intelligence needed to navigate. Again, I think about culture. Different cultures have different uses of body language.
Yes, or physical manifestation, personal space. Yes,
articulation. Exactly. So that's why, sort of that more open, present, flexible stance is reflective of stepping into more capacity.
Yeah, I actually really like the word flexibility. I think that is actually one of the pieces at the core of all of this. We are starting to wrap it up here so that we have some time for questions, but we wanted to just go to a last slide here since we're both in the coaching industry and both passionate about the impacts of both training as a coach and providing coaching to others. We wanted to just focus in the last minute here about how coaching can support vertical development programs.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can each underline a couple of these, but certainly one of the things that's really important that coaching helps leaders do is understand their current mental models and beliefs, and how using those models consistently shapes a certain impact that they create. So just by bringing those to light and having those be presented as not the only mental model can be a big aha for leaders. So that's one of the ones. And then right after that, then testing and challenging and exploring divergent mental models, beliefs, perspectives immediately grows the range or the surface area of choice a leader can operate from. So those are two.
Yeah, I think in addition, it encourages the leader to be at choice. In other words, they're not just operating habitually out of the mental model that's hidden below the surface that they don't even realize that they're operating out of. So surfacing those mental models or perspectives or ways of thinking, and then offering or allowing the leader to access additional models so that they're actually making a choice. Just that creates a whole new level of investment, sophistication, maturity in the leader and how they're choosing to operate. Yeah.
But it takes them into that territory of innovation you spoke of earlier.
Yeah.
Or if I'm making a new and unusual choice for me, I'm entering unfamiliar territory.
Right.
So how willing am I to do that to a leader? How supported am I to do that as a leader? All of that can be really exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Exactly.
But like, how can we not be taking those steps given the rate of change we're facing?
Right. And that's why I'm a big fan of the coaching process itself. It creates like a safe environment for leaders to explore these things that can be scary, that can be vulnerable. Like if you're actually as a leader going to be in a relationship with yourself, that's like a kind of touchy, tender, intimate spot there. And you need someone to navigate that with you, who you trust, who it feels safe to go to those places that we don't usually make a lot of space for in the business environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking, I just want to say two other things. And I think it was Tiffany mentioned this in the chat. Here are some other ways to develop vertically beyond coaching. Although again, as Lori said, we both strongly advocate for coaching as being central to vertical development. You talked about safe space, Lori. I think somebody else, Susan, it might have been you, or maybe Tiffany, it was you. Self-reflection is another way to actually challenge, explore, mine, and choose around your own perspectives and your own thinking. Anything that you can do in a creative context that may include, again, exploration and innovation can help develop vertically, take you outside of the normal mental models. So those introspective practices. Therapy, mental health is a huge topic in organizations these days. I know it is for us. We put in a program last year to support employees. I know it is in Canada where we are, and our companies in the US and the UK. Really important. Therapeutic practices are another place that if you as an organization support can help leaders develop vertically while doing their own important work. So those are different ways to get at some of the benefits.
And I also think different kinds of group work are useful as well. So when you get to the place that you feel more comfortable talking about some of these things with others, that can be a really nice environment for bouncing ideas off of others or sharing experiences that then expand your view or your thinking. So for sure, coaching is not the only way. It's just the way we really like.
That we think open doors to those other ways.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The thing I like about coaching is it tends to create this kind of vertical development in a shorter time frame. Having done a lot of therapy myself, I found that to be a longer process, really, in a way, a lifetime process.
Yeah. Well, and the coaching happens in the context of the business, which is an important context for aspects of this vertical development to help to happen in and to explore the territory of making new choices, expanding one's horizons, taking risks.
Right.
So what do you say, Lori? Should we see what questions come up here?
Yes. Yes, we should.
All right. We can track some of the comments here as
Oh,
well.
you did too. And I think Jess is maybe there to help us too.
Great.
Yes, so we did have a quick question from Susan Carlo, and that was asking to provide the reference for the McKinsey study that you mentioned early in your presentation.
Sure thing. Yeah. Susan and everyone, I'll post, it's from a Globe Newswire article. And in that, you'll see in the 4th paragraph, the link to the survey that McKinsey did. So there you go.
Wow, that was impressive. Look at that. He had it right at his fingertips.
One of the many tabs. It's like, everyone raise your hand if you've got more than 5 tabs open, but yeah, that's one of the ones that's been up.
Great.
Let's see what else is here.
It's a lot of really good engagement in the chat this afternoon.
Great. Dennis, thank you. Good luck on your dissertation for your doctoral. That's exciting. Something, I don't have this link, but I see, Jason, you put in something, and Carol, you put in something about VUCA. If you haven't explored or come across the acronym BANI, B-A-N-I, stands for, so if I can remember, but if you search BANI in relationship to VUCA, brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. It's a theory that's been postulated for now the experience that people are having in response to a VUCA world that's accelerating. And again, vertical development, if you look up that concept, vertical development speaks to how you develop capacity in humans, frankly, leaders, to engage the experience of a BANI world.
Yeah, I think that BANI titling just gives a little more intensity to the experience. The VUCA terminology has been around for a little while, but I think people are experiencing it more like BANI these days, which is the increased intensity of that environment that's causing a raft of emotions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I saw a couple of things in here about coaching and how to implement coaching programs. So also, please feel free. We'll put our info up at the end, and please feel free to reach out for support on some of these things. And we'll be happy to help you out, given your, a unique situation that you're trying to support.
Yeah. Jess, anything else you see?
Any other
reflection? Lots of good comments on reflection. Yes, I'll put the BANI. I'll put the BANI.
Yes. So one comment that I saw is that folks are just excited to be able to share the horizontal, vertical concepts with developing leaders in their organization. And just the focus on present awareness as a mindfulness-based stress reduction coach is a key foundation, and just agreeing with that.
Yeah. I'm reminded too, Marty just pointed that brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. It actually, it speaks to our systems as well as our human experience. So there was a comment earlier about how leaders are having to navigate institutional and systemic transformation, or institutional transformation, systemic transformation, like food supply in the world is a brittle system right now. If you look at supply chain disruptions and the war in Ukraine, those big systems are brittle. Yeah. This idea of then looking at it at an interpersonal level and what that creates in us, and then at the intrapersonal level. So looking looking through the level of this idea of how vertical and horizontal development help people engage in systems challenges as well as interpersonal challenges.
Yeah, as well as leadership challenges. The non-linear part of it, I think, is particularly interesting because I feel like our education system really promotes linear thinking and approach, which doesn't work that great in a non-linear environment. So talk about systems that maybe need some updating to prepare people better for the current environment.
Yeah. Well, and in business too, depending on how you apply budgeting and planning.
Right.
I know we're going through this right now as circumstances change quickly, having agile budgeting processes that still meet whatever standards your company requires of you for reporting or anything else is another.
Oh yeah, yearly budgeting. I don't know if that's going to work much longer because a lot can change in a year these days.
Yeah, hey Mike, I think so too. And I think it's a little deeper on the tip than it was, say, 10 years ago. In the past 2 years have been an accelerator because the business impetus around the Great Resignation or all this transition has forced organizations to look into, or at least invited them to look into what is going on that's having people change.
Well, and Mike,
some of it is money and some of it's, as Lori said, purpose and working conditions. What were you going to say, Lori?
I was just going to say, to Mike's point, a lot of the research around this, the earliest research is in around 2012. A lot of it starting to flow from 2016 on. I actually think this is really a positive thing because I find like we are still using leader development models from the 60s, 70s, even the 50s that no longer really apply or work in our current setting. So it might be the tip of the spear, but there needs to be a tip of the spear now because the things we have been using are more in the vertical development range and work back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe 80s, early 90s, but are not as effective now as they were back then.
I'm gonna make a plug for Sounding Board right now, Lori.
Oh, you are? Okay, go.
Yeah, well, to Mike's point, just about it can be a hard sell, right? Because of the ROI and the measure. I know some of the stuff that you're working on at Sounding Board is metrics and dashboards to demonstrate the effectiveness of coaching engagements. So here's sort of the Trojan horse analogy. Knowing that Lori is trained in coactive and that a number of Sounding Board coaches are coactively trained, you take a horizontal impetus in an organization for training, create a coaching culture, creating coaching skills, and you leverage that horizontal skill-based opportunity to create horizontal and vertical impact. Because the kind of coaching that our coaches do and that the Sounding Board coaches do isn't one or the other. It is inherently both. Right. And I think what you see, Lori, is that the leaders who receive this coaching are more impactful leaders on their business. Is that fair?
Oh, 100%. We see their promotion rate go up dramatically, their engagement rates. We had a team that was the lowest performing team in terms of their engagement. After just 6 months of coaching, they surveyed again, and that team was the highest engaged team. So it does have actual, business impact. And one of the things about the whole coaching industry, it started out kind of like this behind closed doors kind of thing, and specifically only for executives at the highest level in the organization because it was very pricey. But our whole point was to bring the value of this kind of vertical development to all leaders in organization, and to do that using technology so the price point could be lower. But one of the big advantages of the technology is then we have a whole lot of metrics and analytics that we can use to not only look at ROI, but also look at, what are the capabilities being developed here? Is there a theme along those capabilities that the company could take a look at and add additional development opportunities around? Is there a focus for the company that we're wanting to develop these capabilities, in our leaders, and then having that be the focus? So all that information is really useful in expanding out this vertical development approach for leaders.
I'll share one more potential doorway for creating vertical transformation or vertical development in organizations, perhaps through a vertical horizontal lens.
Mhm.
If you work in an organization or work with organizations that are looking for organizational transformation, that can be a sort of a buzzword or a concept that businesses are using. They want to transform their business. Coaching can, often the transformation can focus on things like becoming more agile as an organization. That can introduce some really good skills and processes to it. What it doesn't do is train people in how to be in better relationship and application of those skills and processes.
Right.
So we've found in some of our big global initiatives that when you hear the word organizational transformation, being able to articulate how coaching enables transformation creates the excitement, but also the doorway to start a vertical leader development journey because of what coaching inherently brings. So that could be another buzzword to pick up on. And if you want to talk more about those ideas, we'd be happy to do so. Thanks, Liz.
Okay,
Thanks, Liz.
good.
She posted some information I asked for.
Yeah, appreciate that. And thanks for all the interaction and participation. We're just about to wrap up, but
Yeah.
Carlo, this was so fun. And I did get a couple new ways to think about this and ways to talk about it that made this valuable even for me.
Great. Yeah, me too. Every time we talk, and again, the participation of the audience helped too. So we have one offer that we want to extend to folks. If you're interested, we'll go to 2 wrap-up slides. Thanks, Liz. See you later. Thanks, Amanda.
Whoopsie, wait a minute.
This will come up in the slide deck after, and you can find more about it. So for CTI,
wait, how do I go back? There we go.
There we go.
Got it.
For CTI, if you're interested, you attended this webinar or you're watching it and follow up, and you're interested in learning more about one of our programs. Our programs do horizontal and vertical development in a big way. I was a customer first and I had the experience. There's an offer we have for 2 of those. So feel free to take advantage of that or extend it to another. And that's the contact. You'll get this in follow-up again in the deck. Thanks, Jess, for posting that.
Yes. And if you want to know more about coaching or scaling coaching as a form of vertical leader development in your organization, here's the information about that as well.
Great. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, everyone, for all of your great comments and questions and spending some time with us today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Carlo and Lori, and thank you everyone for your participation and for your wonderful engagement with this afternoon's session. I'd like to thank our sponsor again, Sounding Board, for this presentation. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. As Delia says, lead on. Bye now.
And this concludes today's webinar. We thank you for attending. The recording will be available at webcast.td.org, and we will send our registrants an email tomorrow with this link. Please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts at webcast.td.org/events.